Episode 7 Conspiracy. The Warmaster's duty is to rid these stars of the ruinous powers, and all fell blight containing them, and accomplish, with the provident grace of the God Emperor, an ending unto the demons that stain the Imperium of mankind with their foul distemper. Ecclesiarch Tarquil Benedicta Ausonius, at the sermon of blessing of the Warmaster's election, Balhut, M765. The next 4 years of the Crusade would see dozens of worlds taken by the Imperium along the central belt of the newfound Trailings Group. As Macaroth directed the vast armies and fleets of the Crusade towards the Cabal worlds. Most of these wars were liberation efforts of Imperial worlds which had fallen under the occupation of the archenemy during the initial conquest of the Sabbat Cluster, or had been taken by the various armies of chaos following the fall of Balhut. Nominax. Macaroth personally led the attack on this hive world. It was a regional agricultural powerhouse and essential to allow for Militarum supply lines to support the push on to the Cabal systems. For Macaroth, it was not only strategically important, but also allowed him the opportunity to silence many of his critics within the High Command by conducting a brilliant and swift victory straight after assuming the position of Warmaster. The Praegar regiments led the attack on the world, and under Macaroth's masterful deployment of these regiments, displaying an in-depth knowledge of the different strengths and merits of each of the guard formations in the Crusade. Grimur. The conquest of the world had begun a year before the invasion of Balhut, and had ground on in stalemate since then. Macaroth deployed the 50th Royal Volpoon and gave command of the theatre to Lord General Notchus Sturm. Despite Sturm's future infamy, he led this campaign with skill and conquered the world within a week. The Volpoon's use of armoured support allowed the Crusade to smash the enemy's resistance, annihilating and cementing their victory in the streets of Mathas, the planetary capital. The archenemy leader, Magister Sherenday, committed suicide to avoid capture. After this victory, Sturm and the Royal Volpoon were deployed to attack Voltamund, and here were held fast during the protracted siege of Voytz city, the events of which we discussed in the previous episode. Presarius. The Iron Snakes chapter once more threw themselves into the fight as the Crusade advanced. Presarius had fallen to chaos through the revolt of its mutant underclass, used to work in the tectonic foundries beneath the hive cities. It was the habit on this world to augment these mutants with partial mechanization to assist in their work. But the error of this custom, and some would say the error of cultivating an abhorrent class of genetic deviancy, was shown when these mechanical monstrosities advanced up the spires. The battle for Presarius was grueling. The Iron Snakes were cut off twice from resupply and surrounded. With their ammunition spent, the battle developed into a brutal hand-to-hand melee, which lasted 9 days, resulting in the virtual extinction of the mutants. For the loss of 39 battle brothers. This great feat against the foe was honoured by Chapter Master Vigum, who had his silver guard bow bareheaded before the sons of Ithaca upon their return. We rejoin now the regimental archives of the Tanith First, and those pertinent Imperial records, to explore in more detail several of their engagements, as well as the conspiracy to unseat the Warmaster, and through the hubris of the conspirators, the potential to not only destroy the Crusade, but perhaps the Imperium of Man itself. Fortis Binary. The Ghosts were deployed to this front following their actions on Voltmund. General Hector Drevere had command of the theatre and was tasked with retaking the forges from the rebel population. The Forge world had fallen to an internal rebellion fomented by Chaos Invaders, and these rebels named themselves the Shriven. They had taken the Forge cities, and the Imperial Reconquest Force had been locked in a dogged siege involving trench warfare and mass deployments of artillery, of which Fortis Binary was a major manufacturer, and so had a vast amount of guns and almost endless stockpiles of ammunition, as well as the means to produce more. The Shriven themselves were utterly corrupted, subject to mutations throughout their ranks. Being a Forge world, their equipment was comparable to the Imperial Guard, and at all times wore industrial overalls in place of a standard uniform. This manufacturing capacity and the vast potential industrial production of war materials made its reconquest essential for the future of the Crusade's advance. Drevere was not known as a commander of vision, but with a certain callous use of brute force achieved many victories for the Imperium, both during and before the Sabbat Crusade. For that reason, he had slipped easily into the meat grinder mentality during the campaign, ordering artillery bombardments and mass infantry assaults against defended positions, hoping that one of these costly attacks would create a breakthrough for his armoured and mechanised formations to push through and turn the archenemy's line, and thus winning the war. Foremost amongst his armoured strike forces were the Jantine Patricians, under the command of Colonel Flans. Colonel Flans's identity and history has been covered in a previous episode, and Gaunt would not learn of it until the two met in the deeps below Manazoid Epsilon's surface. The Ghosts, being light infantry and specialising in stealth, were not ideal troops to be deployed to a trench front, and had suffered heavily during their time on the line. Following the repulse of a Shriven assault, the Tanith First, along with the Vitrian Dragoons, were ordered by command to assault the front line. This kind of attack is generally considered suicidal for infantry, and General Drevere appears to have been encouraged in his decision by Colonel Flans. The attack began, and despite heavy resistance and hand-to-hand fighting, the Ghosts captured the Shriven Ford trenches, with Gaunt leading the assault from the front. The Shriven launched a mass artillery bombardment, creating a continuous impenetrable curtain of explosions across the entire front line, and withdrawing their forces back into the cities, safe in the knowledge that this cover could not be penetrated. This was a feat few forces would be able to match, with the sheer volume of continuous fire being unleashed. The almost endless stockpile of ammunition allowed a sustained level of firepower greater than many Imperial armies were even outfitted with. The Tanith were cut in two by the bombardment. Those elements caught behind the shelling returned to the Imperial lines, and those in the Shriven lines were forced to advance deeper into the enemy position to avoid the artillery fire. These forces themselves were cut off from each other, having assaulted different sections of the Shriven front line, but pushed forward through the now abandoned defensive positions, encountering many signs of the corruption that had taken over the population of Fortis Binary. When foul shrines to the ruinous powers were encountered, the Tanith burned them or blew them up. Unfortunately, Trooper Droyle was hit by a piece of shrapnel from one of these destroyed shrines, the effects of which would be felt shortly afterwards. Colonel Corbeck's force found itself entering a series of vast sheds that had enormous networks of drums beating in some kind of ritual fashion. As the drums beat in a seemingly random cacophony, Trooper Droyle fell to the corruption stemming from his wound, transforming into a 12-foot abomination of bone as an entity materialised, using Droyle's flesh to create its form. The beast was felled by a lucky shot from a missile launcher, and Colonel Corbeck, understandably affected by this, ordered the shed and the drums destroyed. The ghosts would destroy several more sheds, and these detonations would mark their position to the other scattered Tanith forces, allowing them to unite. They also attracted a force of Victorian dragoons led by Colonel Zoran. As fortuitous as this gathering was, the vast plumes of fire and smoke erupting deep within the Shriven's lines attracted enemy artillery fire, which began to slowly creep forward and bombard the area. With their forces gathered, they had a combined strength of 400 guardsmen, and the two commanders agreed to strike deeper into the Scriven territory in the hope of doing more damage, rather than being surrounded and destroyed by enemy forces moving to investigate the drum shed's destruction. The Victorian Dragoons are a heavily equipped infantry force. They utilise a form of glass or ceramic chainmail armour, which has some utility in resisting kinetic impacts, but is primarily intended to deflect las and other energy weapons. They also equip themselves with full face helmets. Their weaponry is standard guard issue. However, they tend to set their las rifles to the highest power setting rather than the lower strength as is normal for Imperial forces, believing that it is better to fire once and slay the foe, despite this draining their power packs far more swiftly than would normally be expected. Each Victorian carries with him a small book called the Bahata, which contains their culture's condensed honour code and philosophy. This scratch force entered the Scriven tunnels and followed the sound of activity and the rail tracks, which appear to have linked the ammunition storage dumps with the artillery positions. After several serious firefights, including the slaying of several traitor Astartes, the force discovered a large menhir by foul offerings and radiating the vile aura of the ruinous powers. Seeing this, Gaunt was reminded of the words of the Psyker girl on Derendara decades before, where he was told, "There would be 7 stones of power. Cut them and you will be free. Do not kill them." Holding off the fanatical attacks of the Scriven as they attempted to retake the chamber the menhir was located, Gaunt rigged it with explosives to topple from the blast. Having rigged the explosives, the guardsmen fled, and following their detonation and the toppling of the menhir, an eerie silence descended across the planet. With the toppling of the Standing Stone, the ritual that had been taking place was disrupted, and the followers of Chaos in despair committed mass suicide, perhaps to assuage the anger of their ruinous deities by offering their souls as recompense. Whatever the insane reasoning, Fortis Binary, though damaged and now severely underpopulated, was retaken fully by the Crusade. Conspiracy most foul. Cracia City, Pyrites. Following Fortis Binary, the ghosts were rotated out of the Crusade front line for rest and recuperation. While on the world, Gaunt received a message from a former comrade, asking for assistance. This colleague was a member of the Crusade's intelligence force, and the two had worked together in a previous engagement years before. Gaunt was asked to meet this colleague on the outskirts of the city. This intelligence agent, known to Gaunt as Fered, was not there, however. But one of his couriers was, and handed Gaunt a data crystal, set with Vermilion security clearance, one of the highest in the Imperium. As this exchange was taking place, they were attacked by an unidentified strike team which slew the courier, and despite Gaunt killing all but one of the assassins, he was also almost eliminated. If not for the timely arrival of a slightly inebriated Commissar Blenner, who had insisted in the officers' bar on accompanying Gaunt. Gaunt and Blenner had served together in the Scholar Progenium, and were friends of a sort, although serving with a disciplined, loyal and courageous regiment like the Greys had softened Blenner's approach to his commissarial duties. As a side note, the Tanith First left its mark on Pyrites through the elimination of a local criminal chief and his entire gang of 20 brutes in a gunfight in the darkness of a warehouse where Corbic, Rawn and Trooper Fagor, after a disagreement over a cargo of illicit black market items, the gang went in, and after a gunfight there was nothing but a pile of corpses. And it is still spoken about to this very day. En route to Manazoid Epsilon. The frigate Navarre had been reassigned, so the Ghosts were transported upon the Mechanicum mass conveyor, Absalom, along with 8 other regiments, 4 divisions of Jantine patricians, and 3 Mechanicus battalions. While on board, Gaunt was almost assassinated by a crew member who appears to have been under the psychic control of another passenger, one Inquisitor Haldane. Those interested in a more in-depth background on this Inquisitor are asked to gain the proper clearance from the relevant authorities and to request access to those historical records covering the activities of one Inquisitor Eisenhorn and the Scarus sector. Haldane appears to have been the instigator of a plot to replace Warmaster Macaroth with General Dravir, whom he believed he could control and thus direct the vast resources of the Crusade towards his own, no doubt, laudable aims. In order to progress this plan, he needed the information contained on the data crystal, which was now in Gaunt's possession. He did not know what information was contained within the crystal, but he knew that this would tip the balance of power within the High Command and topple Macaroth. The situation on board escalated quickly, with the willing involvement of the Jantine patricians who, under Flanz's orders, had extended the grudge against Gaunt to the whole of the Tanith First. After a number of clashes on deck, Major Rawn was captured and interrogated by Inquisitor Haldane. The Ghosts launched a rescue mission, utilising their stealth skills, and the sniper Mad Larkin shot Haldane in the face, incapacitating and nearly killing him. Larkin used a looted weapon, which is a common practice within the Guard, will often loot weaponry from war zones as trophies or mementos. With Rawn recovered and the assistance of Colonel Zolan, whose Vitrians were also on board, and himself had formerly worked with and been asked to assist Gaunt in keeping the intelligence safe by Fered, they were able, through subterfuge, to gain access to the ship's security mainframe and decrypt the data on the crystal. The information contained within identified an ancient relic from the Dark Age of technology and pointed to the location of a fully functional standard template constructor, which built Iron Men. Iron Men were one of the main causes for the destruction of the old human empire during the Age of Strife, and one of the reasons for the Imperium's fanatical aversion to artificial intelligence. The recovery of an STC system would be one of the greatest events in Imperial history since the Great Crusade. let alone one which produced the terrifying war machines which brought mankind to the brink of extinction. Its worth would be incalculable. As an example, the only comparable situation in recent Imperial history was the recovery of paper copies of technical schemata from an STC system found by explorators. The plans showed how to produce strange new alloys to create combat blades and knives. Each of the explorators was rewarded with an entire world to rule for this great feat. So I must leave it to you to imagine the significance of finding an Iron Man producing STC. Gaunt revealed this information to his officers and men so that they understood the situation's importance. He determined to destroy it, reasoning that the Iron Man were a horror that should never be returned to the galaxy, and most likely were corrupted beyond retrieval, having been on a world held by chaos for centuries. The STC was located on Manazoid Epsilon, which was a lesser objective in the Manazoid system. Dravir and Haldane were aware that where Gaunt went, the power they sought would be located, and arranged for the General to have the command of that theatre, and Colonel Flance volunteered his Jantine patricians to the invasion. The Ghosts were deployed to the attack on Shrine Target Primaris, the largest main settlement on the world. As the Crusaders advanced on the different targets across the planet, the large stone towers ringing these settlements erupted with fierce energy, and arch-enemy forces appeared on top of the towers via some form of teleportation, unleashing heavy firepower from energy weapons and vicious rifles, firing barbed rounds which shattered into cruel shards upon impact. The Ghosts managed to withdraw before the towers became armed, but the other forces were heavily mauled. The Ghosts managed to bring down a tower, breaking the ring of energy and allowing entry to what looked like a dead city. To what looked like an ancient dead city. Dravir, seeing that the Ghosts were the only force to have broken through, took the opportunity to declare them traitors and ordered Colonel Flance to hit them in the rear and destroy them. Gaunt and a strike team of Ghosts were already entering the tunnels using the mapped route contained in the intelligence information. They were joined by Agent Fered and his bodyguard. As they entered the tunnels, the power from their las rifles and other energy sources began to be drained. They had a firefight with a pack of arch-enemy troopers before coming upon the STC's chamber. After navigating through a number of booby traps, the strike team entered the chamber, and they came before the vast machine, surrounded by hundreds of deactivated Iron Men. Gaunt began to order the planting of demolition charges. Agent Fered was shocked by this and attempted to stop the destruction of the STC, and was slain during the ensuing firefight. The firefight accidentally activated the STC and the surrounding Iron Men. The first Iron Man the STC produced was a corrupted creature, proving Gaunt's assumption of the grip of chaos on the ancient relic. The Ghosts set their charges and ran. Unbeknownst to Gaunt, Agent Fered was a puppet of Inquisitor Haldane, and hearing of the existence of the Iron Men STC, he exerted and pulled more of himself directly into his pawn in an attempt to secure the machine. When Gaunt slew Fered, the psychic backlash from being so closely linked to his death created a devastating storm of energy which detonated, which atomized Haldane, General Dravir, and the entire Leviathan command vehicle they were based in an instant. Despite Dravir's end, the orders of the Jantine patricians still stood. Under Major Brockus' command, a man who had witnessed the death of General Darcius armed himself with his heavy stubber, and, leading his men from the front, he and his patricians pursued the Ghosts, now engaged with the enemy deep within the ruined city. Sergeant Blaine had been left to guard the Ghosts' rear, in anticipation of this kind of situation. Although they did not expect the patricians to actually attack them, the Jantine's hatred for Gaunt, and by extension the Tanith, was too great, and it is doubtful they would have stopped even if ordered. In a stunning last stand, 50 Taniths stood against the entire Jantine regiment and slew 300 of them before being wiped out. Despite these heavy losses, the Jantine launched themselves at the rest of the Tanith regiment, although now the Ghosts, thanks to the sacrifice of Sergeant Blaine's men, had a chance to prepare positions for the attack. Heavy fighting ensued. Major Brockus was the last to fall in battle, with a heap of the enemy dead around him, as the Victorians had moved up to support the Tanith, surrounding and annihilating the Jantine patricians. Major Brockus was commanding the attack because Colonel Flance had entered the tunnels in pursuit of Gaunt. In the darkness below, the two men met, and Flance revealed his identity and the disgrace of General Darcius. Flance and those patricians with him fell in the ensuing combat. The destruction of the STC relic caused a massive explosion, which, for all intensive purposes, destroyed the main shrine city. This broke the back of the enemy, and Manazoid Epsilon fell shortly afterwards. Warmaster Macaroth sent a communication through to Gaunt, thanking him for all of his efforts during the battle. In the next episode, the advance towards the Cabal systems continues, with many great victories and defeats.